A dark Friday enveloped Jerusalem. Heavy clouds slowly gathered over Golgotha. At the foot of the three crosses, a Roman soldier was busy with his job, executing people. And on that day, the one crucified in the middle was Jesus from Nazareth. And his orders were clear: make sure this man dies. And he did it without hesitation. By the 6th hour, it was as if the sun suddenly disappeared. The whole place was dark until the 9th hour. And at that time, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" After that cry, he took a deep breath, and there his life ended. At that moment, the great curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, as if heaven itself was the one tearing it. And the Roman soldier who was facing him, the very executioner himself, was surprised and said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." On that day, the world of a warrior was shattered. The man who killed became a witness to a miracle. The hand that pierced the side of Jesus was also the first Gentile to confess that Jesus was truly the Son of God. Because of this, he left his high position in the most powerful empire in the world. He left his rank, his power, and a life full of violence, and he joined the followers of Jesus. He traveled to distant lands, preaching the gospel that he himself witnessed. But his end became part of the history of the church, and until now he is known by the name Longinus. The question now is, who was Longinus before that day? Before the death of Jesus, Longinus was a Roman centurion. A Roman centurion is the title given to an officer in the Roman army who commands more than 100 soldiers. They are the elite of the army, known for their courage, discipline, and ability to lead in the midst of chaos and war. Longinus's life then centered on strength and violence, obeying Rome's orders without question. Muscles alone won't make you a centurion. You need to be sharp-minded, skilled in strategy, and ready to be ruthless when necessary. And that's how Longinus was. He grew old, accustomed to the shouts of soldiers, the blood of enemies, and the coldness of a duty without emotion. Until that day came, the day that changed everything. The whole city wasn't even awake yet when rumors started to spread. They said a well-known teacher was being arrested. They kept repeating a name on the dark street, Jesus of Nazareth. He was taken last night in Gethsemane, a garden at the foot of the mountain where he was betrayed by his own disciple. Gethsemane is a place where Jesus often prayed with his disciples. The one who sold him out, Judas Iscariot, a fellow disciple, in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, a small amount compared to the weight of betrayal. Jesus Christ was brought to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the council of religious leaders at that time, who had the authority to try religious cases. He was slapped, spat on, and humiliated there. And then they said he committed blasphemy because he admitted that he was the Son of God. But there was one problem. They couldn't impose the death penalty. They didn't have the authority to kill. In order to have Jesus executed, they first needed to ask permission from Rome. So as soon as the sun rose, they brought him before Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, was the highest Roman official in the area. Pilate was seated on his judgment seat, and as he looked at Jesus, he asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered quietly but firmly, "You said it." The chief priests and elders continued to hurl accusations, but Jesus remained silent. No explanation, defense, or complaint. Pilate was confused. He was used to seeing criminals cry, beg, or lie to save their lives. But this man was silent, calm, as if he wasn't afraid of death. As Pilate was watching, suddenly a messenger ran toward him. He brought a message from Pilate's wife that said, "You should have nothing to do with that man. He is innocent. I have suffered today because of a dream about him." Pilate was troubled. He felt that something greater than himself was happening, and he had no power to stop it. Every Passover, there's a tradition to release one prisoner. Pilate saw this as a way to save Jesus. So he asked the people, "Who do you want me to release, Jesus? Or Barabbas, a well-known criminal and murderer?" But the religious leaders stirred up the people, and together they angrily demanded to release Barabbas. Pilate raised his hand and asked again, "Then what should I do with Jesus?" And all at once the crowd shouted, "Crucify him." Pilate was troubled and asked again, "Why? What crime has he committed?" But the crowd shouted even louder, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" There, Pilate saw that he had no more power to resist. The anger of the people was rising, and he would look like a rebel to Rome if he continued to resist. He took a basin, poured water over his hands, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. You are responsible for this." He released Barabbas and handed over Jesus to be crucified. The soldiers brought Jesus inside the Praetorium. The Praetorium is the headquarters of the Roman soldiers, where punishments and interrogations are carried out. Longinus, the Centurion, stood at the door as usual. He was used to seeing suffering, used to the screams, the blood, and the pleas. He had seen many die before, but today something was different. This prisoner, Jesus, he didn't fight back, didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't beg. And every blow, it was as if he accepted it wholeheartedly, as if he knew it had to happen. And the soldiers were even more entertained, but not in a good way. They took off Jesus' clothes. He was shamed, and the cruelest part began. As they tightly tied Jesus to a pillar, the severe whipping began immediately. The whip repeatedly struck his back with a thunderous sound. His skin burst open with every strike, but even so, not a single scream came from his lips. Longinus, the Roman centurion, the officer in command of more than 100 soldiers, stood by, arms crossed, accustomed to blood and death. But today, something new stirred within him. Not because of the violence, he was used to that, but because of the dignity of the man they were tormenting. While the other soldiers were joking, they covered Jesus with a purple robe. They broke off branches and made a crown of thorns, then violently pressed it onto his head. Blood flowed down his face, but his gaze remained calm and clear. It was as if he knew something they didn't understand. They put a stick in his hand, pretending it was a king's scepter. They even knelt before him while laughing, shouting mockingly, "Long live the King of the Jews!" But Longinus, who used to always join in the cruelty, was now just quietly watching. There was an inexplicable heaviness pressing down on his chest. They hit Jesus with a stick, slapped, spat on, and pushed him. When they grew tired, they removed the robe, dressed Jesus in his own clothes, and got him ready for the cross. But Longinus couldn't look away. Something within him that had been dormant was awakening. He didn't know why this man wasn't fighting back. He couldn't understand why. In the midst of shame and pain, he couldn't see any anger on his face. The only thing present was a deep and immeasurable compassion. And in the midst of the noise and laughter, there was a question that slowly ate away at his mind. Who really is this person? He doesn't know yet, but the answer is coming soon. Because on that day, Longinus would witness the greatest display of love the world has ever seen. A moment that would change the course of his entire life. When the soldiers led Jesus out of the Praetorium, the official Roman court, they placed on his shoulders a rough and heavy cross, stained with blood and the history of the criminals who had carried it before him. There began the slow, painful walk to Golgotha, the so-called Hill of Skulls, a place where those whom Rome wanted erased from the world were brought. Longinus, as the officer, was at the front. He was the one clearing the way through the overflowing crowd. Shouts, curses, and disgust greeted Jesus. Some spat, some hurled words like spears, but there were also a few who silently wept as they watched him. In the midst of the crowd, a mother struggled to follow, Maria. She could no longer find her son in the crowd, so she approached Juan, the disciple. "Juan, help me. Take me to my son." Together, they positioned themselves, trying to make their way through the crowd. Suddenly, a soldier pushed Jesus hard. His body, almost drained of strength, collapsed onto the hard stones. This was the first time he fell, and a muffled groan came from the people. When Jesus fell, the heavy cross on his back also fell. "Stand up," shouted the soldiers as they struck him. With painful effort, he slowly stood up again, trembling, shaking from exhaustion, and he walked once more. When Maria and Juan reached Jesus just as he fell for the second time, Maria could no longer hold herself back. She ran closer, knelt beside her bloodied and wounded son, her hands trembling and tears welling up in her eyes. In a weak voice, she whispered, "I'm here." Jesus lifted his bloodied face and slowly replied, "You see, Mother, I am making all things new." Those were not just simple words to encourage. It was a living prophecy of what was to come next. As the cross pressed heavier against the wounds on his back, his knees weakened once again. And for the third time, Jesus fell to the ground again. The soldiers struck Jesus, forcing him to stand, but his knees would no longer respond. He had no strength left. From a distance, Longinus watched. He was used to seeing people completely break down. But now he saw something different. Jesus' body was broken, but his spirit remained strong. There was something in him that could not be broken. So Longinus approached and, with a heavy voice, pulled a man from the side of the road. An ordinary citizen heading home from the fields. He was ordered, "You carry that cross." Jesus slowly stood up. His eyes searched for the man. Despite the hardship, there was a look of gratitude in his eyes. That man was Simon of Cyrene, a stranger who suddenly became part of the most important moment in history. Together they carried the cross while the whole city watched what seemed like a death march. The women on the side of the road were openly weeping. They no longer cared about what others were saying. And despite the blood and exhaustion, Jesus looked at them. "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Longinus heard that, and it was as if something stirred deep within his heart. How did he think of that? How can someone who's about to die still think of the welfare of others? And finally they reached Golgotha, the dry hill of death, where Rome ended the lives it wanted to erase. The 3 crosses were ready. No resistance, no cursing, no movement of anger. Jesus stretched out his arms, as if he was willingly offering himself. It was as if what was happening was not by force, but for a deeper reason. A soldier held his arm. Another one raised the hammer. And with the first strike of the nail, a voice echoed that was cut off in the heavens. Maria bowed her head. Her whole body trembled. Juan closed his eyes. Those around them stopped in their tracks. Some began to cry. Others remained mocking. Longinus was unmoved. He did not move. He did not speak. But deep inside, the walls he had built for so long were crumbling. When the crosses were raised, Jesus was in the center with 2 criminals on either side. As the soldiers pulled, the post sank into the hole, and Jesus' whole body shook from the force of the blow. The 2 criminals shouted. One was furious at Jesus. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself. Save us too." But the other, even though he was weak, spoke sincerely. "Don't you fear God? We were both sentenced. We deserve this." But he did nothing wrong. Then he looked at Jesus. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered with a promise that lasts forever. "Today you will be with me in paradise." Longinus stopped in his tracks. With all the executions he had witnessed, not once had he ever heard such words from someone they were putting to death. As time passed, it seemed as if the world grew silent. The light gradually faded until darkness completely covered the whole land. Longinus stood there. He couldn't look away from Jesus, and even during crucifixion, Jesus spoke. "Not to complain, but to forgive. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." A shiver ran through Longinus's chest. Forgiveness. For whom? For those who hurt him? For those who crucified him, including him? Thunder rumbles in the distance as a storm approaches. Caiaphas and the religious leaders were satisfied. They left. But Maria stayed there, held by Juan, crying as every second felt like it was tearing her heart apart. In a weak voice, Jesus spoke again. "Woman, here is your son." And to Juan, "Here's your mother." Jesus' body grew weaker. His breathing grew labored. Then he suddenly broke the silence, crying out, "My God, my God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those around were disturbed. Did you hear that? He's calling for Elias. Maybe he's waiting for the prophet to save him. They don't know that the most important moment is approaching. There was a man standing beside the cross who immediately ran. He soaked a sponge in vinegar. He put it on the end of a stick and lifted it to Yeshua's lips. But Yeshua refused it. He let no comfort distract him from completing his sacrifice. The surroundings grew silent. It was a silence as if heaven was preparing for something. Yeshua lifted his gaze. He knew the final moment was near, and with all the strength left in him, he cried out, "It is finished." It was as if the heavens held their breath. Jesus looked up again and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." He bowed his head and died. At that moment, the earth responded. Jerusalem shook with an earthquake, as if the world was splitting apart. The rocks split, some tombs opened, and the veil in the temple, the thick curtain that separated the holy from the most holy place, was torn from top to bottom as if a hand from heaven had grasped it. Everyone stopped. The people who were just mocking earlier are now trembling, beating their chests and repeatedly saying the same thing. "What have we done?" And there, in the midst of shock and trembling, Longinus knelt down. He could no longer hold back the words that came out of his mouth. With a trembling voice, he said with all his strength, "Truly, this man is the Son of God." The centurion who led the execution of Jesus was the first Gentile to openly confess that the one they had killed was the Messiah. Silence slowly engulfed Golgotha. The body of Jesus hung there. There was no more breath. The soldiers, wrapped in fear by what was happening, began to retreat. The people, confused and afraid, went home. The Sabbath was approaching, and according to their custom, it was forbidden to have bodies still hanging when it arrived. So they immediately went to Pilate, asking to have the legs of those crucified broken to hasten their death. Longinus was ordered, and he gave the command. The soldiers approached the two. With a single blow of heavy iron, they broke the bones of their legs. But as for Jesus, Longinus knew that he was already dead. However, he needed to make sure of it. Orders from Rome, law of the empire. So he took his spear, approached the central cross, and with a quick and sharp thrust, he pierced the side of Jesus. And from there, suddenly blood and water gushed out. John remained by his side, and later he wrote with full devotion, "According to John, the one who saw this has testified, and what he says is true." Longinus stared at the wound, then at his spear stained with blood. Unknowingly, he fulfilled the prophecy. They will look upon him whom they pierced. Blood to redeem, water to cleanse. There are some stories from ancient tradition. Longinus reportedly had poor eyesight due to an eye illness. But when the blood and water from Jesus' side dripped onto him, his vision suddenly became clear. It was like the cloud in his eyes vanished. And right there at the foot of the cross under the weeping sky, it was only then that he truly understood. He did not kill a rebel. He did not stab a criminal. What they killed was the Son of God. He knelt again now as a man who believes. The Holy Scriptures did not say everything that happened next, but according to ancient stories and church records, one thing is clear. After that day, Longinus could never go back to the way he was before. He couldn't return to the camp as if nothing had happened. He couldn't ignore the blood, the wounds, the voice of Jesus, the earthquake, the light, and the darkness. And above all, the fact that he personally saw the Son of God die to save even him. For several days, sleep did not come to him. Longinus couldn't stop picturing Jesus nailed to the cross, silent, bloody, and suspended between heaven and earth. It was like a fire that wouldn't die out, no matter how hard he tried to cover it. He could no longer follow orders without questioning himself. Am I still serving the right cause? Is it true or just a blind empire? A few days after the execution, whispers spread throughout Jerusalem. Some say the body is no longer in the tomb. Some people claim that they saw Jesus alive, walking and appearing to some of his followers. Longinus just stayed quiet while listening. But every word struck his heart as if something inside him was coming back to life. He knew this wasn't a lie. There was a voice inside him telling him that everything didn't end there. While the whole city was returning to normal, Longinus couldn't go back to the way he was. His mind remained at Golgotha. On the words Jesus spoke, the way he looked, and the silence he could never forget. His heart, accustomed to blood, shouts, and commands, was slowly beginning to open. He was no longer the same soldier who never backed down. It was as if a great force was knocking on his soul. And when he heard the whispers, he was alive, some had seen him. He wasn't surprised. He didn't ask questions, nor did he doubt. The only thing that entered his mind was a peaceful certainty. It was true. Jesus had conquered death. For the first time, Longinus understood the true meaning of faith. For the first time, he saw the weight of the cross, not just as an instrument of punishment, but as a symbol of forgiveness and immense love. For the first time, he understood what redemption truly meant. So he made a decision that he could never take back. He took off his armor, surrendered his sword, and turned his back on Rome without looking back. That's where his new life began. He joined the disciples. He sought out those who had been with Jesus, listened, asked questions, and learned. And as his understanding deepened, he experienced even more, a forgiveness he once couldn't understand. And as the number of the first believers grew, his name, Longinus, spread. The Roman Centurion who once ordered death now walks barefoot, carrying the fire of the good news. He preached about the king whom he once helped crucify. For many years, he traveled through the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea, places in modern-day Turkey, to proclaim the name of Jesus. At every gathering, he repeated the same testimony. I saw him die, but in his death, I found life. And with every word, those who listened trembled, because his testimony was not a story, but a wound that healed. He did not preach based on hearsay. He did not rely on other people's stories. He was there himself. He saw everything. And because of this, every word he spoke, he pierced the hearts of those who listened. The hand that once held a sword, now it is raised to proclaim the good news. There, Longinus preached, and many believed, not just because he was a good speaker, but because he was the centurion who stood at the foot of the cross. He himself was the witness to the most important moment in history. But Rome does not tolerate anyone who turns their back on its power. And soon the persecution came. Longinus was arrested, interrogated, beaten. He was threatened with death. He was offered freedom in exchange for one thing: renounce Christ. But with the peace of someone who has found the truth, he refused. Without hesitation, that was when the sentence was imposed. The same empire that taught him how to be a soldier will now kill him as a traitor. They took him outside the city. On top of a lonely hill, that's where he was beheaded. Longinus died as a martyr, not in fear, but with his eyes looking up. He was imitating the last moment he saw in Jesus on the cross. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. His body was buried in the region of Cappadocia, and not long after, the local Christians began to honor him as a saint. Some said that miracles happened at his grave. His name spread, not as an executioner, but as a witness, a believer, and a martyr. And as the centuries passed, the church recognized him as Saint Longinus, the one who saw, the one who believed, the one who offered his life for him, who was the first to offer his life for him. But he is not alone. There is someone else you need to know. Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, James. From the narrow streets of Jerusalem to the farthest parts of the world, these 12 men carried a message that could challenge kings, bring down temples, and divide history in two. They had no armies, no weapons, no political connections. All they had was faith in what they saw and the testimony of their own lives. And if you want to know how they defeated the most powerful empire in the world, not by force but by faith, watch the video that will appear on the screen, The Apostles. Here you will see the true beginning of how 12 ordinary men brought a message that reached us and changed the whole world.